Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, frequent flyers. Today in the lounge, I have Mark Cheney with me, and we met in our heroic speaking journey. Mark is a Master Certified BBQ judge. I thought that was very important to note first. And he is also a certified mental performance consultant and the director of mental performance at Faith Lutheran in Las Vegas. Prior to starting the mental performance game, he worked as a mental conditioning coach. And in his private practice, he draws on his 25 years of experience working with college teams in sports, business leaders, and rising youth athletes. Today, we're talking about how every action that you take is a performance, and getting out of your own way is a mental game. Mark, I'm really pleased to have you on the episode today. Thank you for joining me.
All right, thanks for having me, Sarah. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I saw that quote, every action is a performance. And obviously, knowing the journey we've been through and taking our speaking craft to the next level, I thought it was really, really fitting. How have you approached the actions that you take, whether it's a day-to-day action or it's, a speech that you're about to give or working with a team or helping an athlete? Do you find that there's a difference or do you have the same methodology?
Well, let me first say I love that you picked that quote because it's very similar to something I've been saying to people for years, that every day is performance. And so whether I'm talking to a high school kid or an adult, your job is a performance, your
Yeah.
game is a performance, your speech is a performance, asking somebody out on a date is a performance. And we all feel the same nerves and excitement or anxiety in those moments. So, it's a super quote to get us started with. I think naturally as humans, we look at the situation and inherently we tend to assign value or importance to that event. And so sometimes that causes us to look at the event differently.
Yeah.
And now we create more importance or less importance, and all of a sudden that changes how we think about it, that changes how we respond to it.
Right.
And so going to the grocery store is not a big deal. Having to obtain supplies and necessary resources for a conference that everyone's counting on you to make sure everyone's fed, all of a sudden it's basically the same act. You got to go get food, but the consequences, the stakes are a little bit higher, and so we respond differently in those moments. And so I don't think we can pretend that everything's the same.
No.
There are kind of two schools of thought in the world of sport, is that, oh, every game's the same. Just treat the Super Bowl next week just like it's a preseason game.
Yeah.
And the field is the same size and the ball is the same and the number of guys in the field is the same. So yes, it's the same game, but there's a whole lot of other noise out there around it, and so we're going to respond differently. So the best way I like to think about it, Ken Rabiza, was I would say like a godfather of the sports psychology world. Worked with the Chicago Cubs when they won the World Series, and I asked him that question. I said, "Is everything the same, or how do you approach that?" He said, "Every game's a big game, but some games are bigger." And I think if we acknowledge that and recognize how we're responding that moment, then we're set up to act in a way that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And you're right. It's often the meaning and the story that we attribute to the action that we're about to take or the performance we're about to give that impacts how we respond. And so it really is in that intentionality and in that practice and recognizing that it's all important, right? Just sometimes the stakes are higher and we get to determine what those stakes are and where we place that importance. And so that's also part of it.
Yeah, and I think you used the key word there. That's the story we tell ourselves. And sometimes we're writing the story and we're trying to write the ending while we're still performing, and now that gets us out of the present.
Right.
And we're thinking about the explanation of why it didn't turn out the way it did, or we're thinking about how we're going to regale our friends or teammates with how great it was. And then you don't get the outcome you want because you've gotten into story writing mode instead of crafting the story.
Yes. Or writing as in, writing rather than riding, like riding the wave, right? And
Sure.
being in the moment. I love that. I love that. So when we look at performances, no matter the size of them, obviously this is a mental game. So what is a certified mental performance? Like, how did you get into this field? And when was it that you first realized the power of the mental game?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey because it's not something that I set out to do. It's not like I was 16 and said, "I wanna be a mental performance coach." And, um, but I did at an early age recognize that I enjoyed coaching, and then in the process of coaching, I had a team that I felt should have won a state championship. You know, they'd won the regional tournament the previous week, set a state record for best score, and we go to the state tournament. We play our worst round of the year. This was a girls golf team, so I gathered them together after the day. I said, we played as bad as we possibly could, and we're still in the lead. We're fine. Tomorrow's going to be a better day.
Hmm.
And then the next day, we played worse. So we played our two worst rounds of the year in the state tournament. I could see it coming. It's like watching a train going off a bridge. Like you could see
Mm.
what was coming, and I had no way to stop it. Like I tried to say the things that I knew as a coach and in my experience, but I just didn't. I wasn't able to. Maybe the better expression, I couldn't pull it out of the dive,
Hmm.
and so that started some digging of reading and looking around, and then in the process of trying to help my own athletes be better and then help students be better, you start going down rabbit holes, and then that links you to another book and another book, and then finally I had a friend said, "Hey, you're talking about sports psychology." It's like, oh, okay, now I have a name for what I'm interested in. And then the second thing is that you need to go back to school. So went back to school, got additional education, had the opportunity to work in Florida with tremendous people at IMG Academy, and that really started the path. But it was solely about how can I help my athletes, my students be better, and then it's grown far beyond that, and it introduced me to people in places I really had no idea that I would ever speak to.
Yeah. Amazing. It's when we have language for something, it's very powerful, right? Because that helps us gain the clarity that we need in order to take action. And I love that you talked about sometimes we can see the unfolding, the dive, whatever it is that is about to happen, and we might not be able to stop it. It's not always the case, no matter how many books you read, no matter what you do. Sometimes those are the experiences that they've already been set in motion for some time, right? And so now that we're witnessing them, that doesn't necessarily mean we can always catch them, but we get to learn for next time and then improve the reaction speed and improve those small steps that go into what led to that outcome.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I really like to think what I do more in terms of being a mason rather than a plumber.
Hmm.
A mason lays a foundation
Yeah,
that's going to support the structure and it's going to withstand the wind and the rain and the storm. If you don't have a strong foundation, then that building's going to collapse.
right,
Versus being a plumber, well, you typically call the plumber when you have a leak.
right.
And so we've got to try to fix something as quickly as possible, and probably damage is already done. So I mean, yes, we can do that work, but I'd much rather equip people first. And part of that process is learning from some previous events. But if we can lay that foundation, then I think we're in a much better place than trying to fix what's going on.
Absolutely. And having that strong foundation, I mean, that's what really supports you, as you mentioned, through the weather of what is inevitable. We can't have sunny blue sky days every single day. I mean, if you're in Las Vegas, you get a lot of them, but you still do get weather, right? And so we cannot rush the process of building that foundation, because that when we rush, then we start to have Band-Aid solutions, right? It's the temporary quick fix that in the moment maybe gets you through, but it cannot sustain additional pressure, additional action. And then that's why we find ourselves down the road with a severe illness, with a problem at work, with the dispute with our spouse that now has turned into something that seems almost irreconcilable.
Hmm. Yeah, I was playing golf with a couple of pilots here in Vegas a few summers ago, and they refer to flying into Vegas as the waves of McCarran, now Harry Reid, because there's in the summer you get a lot of turbulence just from the heat, and you're just going to have to ride those waves. And um, I also pulling from another. I think this was the president of Southwest. I think he said turbulence is inevitable, but misery is optional.
Yep.
And how are we going to ride those waves and experience that? It's very much what resources do you have to draw on, and then what's your perception of the situation? How do you look at this? I mean, you fly into Vegas and you hear kids in the airplane think it's a lot of fun
Right.
because they're like, "Wee, this is great," and then somebody who's perhaps older, more experienced, is reaching for the airsick bag because it's not enjoyable for them, but it's just how you look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of my good friends, Andy's watching us live right now, and he's, commented that we have to live life in the moment because you never know what's going to happen the next 10 minutes, right? We think we know and we can make all these great plans, but very often life has other things in store for us. And, Andy's recovering from a health crisis, and, regret doesn't get us anywhere. So it's about making sure that we choose to live our values, right? And so Andy's been on the road to recovery for a long time and sharing his story to help others get out of that as well, which I think is also very important.
Yeah, you mentioned the values. I think everyone has to establish what those are first. Go back to laying a foundation.
Yeah.
It has to be based on what you value, and then that should be guiding and directing
Yes, it's
the
the compass.
decisions you make and the actions you take.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, like when I was doing coaching a lot of people will give you like, oh, my values are family and my career. I'm like, those are not values. Like let's dig a little bit deeper into what that actually means to you. Like, how do you know when you're living it? How do you know when you have it? Because if you can't define that, you're always going to feel this emptiness, and you're going to be chasing after the quick dopamine hits, and having the oh shiny object, right, happening to you, rather than this is my lane and I have a mission and I'm going there, and I'm all this other noise, as you mentioned before, is not what I'm going to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
So, when you talk about optimizing life performance, I gather that it has a lot to do with values and helping people to get into that lane. And you have something called the performance blueprint. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is, and also how you view optimization of our life performance?
So I have two daughters. They're 18 and 20 now. But I remember having this distinct thought when we found out the first time that we were expecting that uh, you have to have a license to drive a car. You have to have a license to fly a plane. You have to have a license to do hair. There's a manual for your car. There's a manual for your TV, for your refrigerator. Like there's none of that to be a parent. Like anybody can be a parent, and there's no license. There's no vetting. Um, everybody gets to do it, and so I had that thought a long time ago, and then as I've gone through 25 years of teaching and coaching, and then just seeing changes in culture, changes in technology, I started seeing people come with different skills, or maybe not as many skills as we used to expect people would come to school with.
Hmm.
And I started having to tell people, you need to do this, when that hadn't happened in the past, where it was just a given that people would have that skill and have that ability. And so it was just really interesting. And that was probably about 7, 8 years ago that I really started to notice having to say some of those things. I thought, okay, what else do we need to identify that we somewhat take as a given, that good students do, that good employees do, that maybe is not a given anymore. And so I started compiling a list of those, and that's what I call a success behavior. It's just what good people, good employees, good workers, good athletes do. And some of them are really simple, like show up,
Right.
listen, finish.
That's
So
a great one.
it's not. I don't think it's anything that's a great revelation, but when I started to pull these all together, I started noticing that there's a difference, and I think of it again, just some of it's a nature of how culture has changed. Some of it's technology again that's led to people not having some of those skills. As I made my journey through sports psychology, I started looking at the academic and the workplace differently too, because all of a sudden we're trying to figure out why a student doesn't do well in a class. And I came back from working in Florida and said, well, that's a confidence issue. That's a motivation issue. That's a resilience issue. That's a mindset issue. It's not about their math skills or their science skills. It's really outside of school that's creating the challenge. And so I started seeing the parallels of sports psychology, and that's where I got to thinking it's not really sports psychology. It's not even performance psychology. It's like life psychology. These are skills that you need to have to function. And interestingly enough, too, as I got into sports psychology, I was exposed to this whole literature on motor learning and skill development, which you would think as a teacher that I had gotten trained in learning, but that's not really the case. You get trained in teaching, and teaching is not the same thing as learning. And so as I went into, okay, how do I help my athlete improve their golf swing or improve their jump shot? Then I found this whole body of literature that addressed learning in the classroom too. And I was like, oh, we should be teaching people these skills as well. And I asked some of my students, I said, what do you think? Does school teach you how to learn, or does it teach you what to learn? And across the board, they all said what to learn. And I think that happens in the workplace. When you get onboarded, they give you the manual, they give you the policies, what you need to do, not really how to do it. And so then I got to think, okay, I've got these 3 areas: the sports psychology, the behaviors, and then how to learn. How do these intersect? How do these work together? And there's a basketball coach in the Hall of Fame who's not really well known. His name is Tex Winter. And Tex Winter created an offense called the triangle offense. Well, why is Tex Winter in the Hall of Fame? Because he was the assistant coach with the Chicago Bulls with Phil Jackson when Michael Jordan was playing for them.
Nice. Okay.
Michael Jordan didn't win a championship before Phil Jackson and Tex Winter started coaching the Bulls. Afterwards, after they added the triangle offense, they won 6 championships. A couple of years later, Phil goes to coach the Lakers. Kobe's not won a championship. They implement the triangle offense. Now the Lakers are winning championships. And so the triangle offense, this idea is that you always you're creating triangles on the court. And if there are any Ted Lasso fans out there, I know in season 3 there was also a segment where Ted learns the triangle offense and uses it to change his performance. But that's the way I like to think about this intersection of your performance assets. So that's the sports psychology, your learning strategies, and your success behaviors. So it really works in concert with each other. So if I believe that I'm not good at something, so that's a mindset, then I have told myself a story that I'm not good at public speaking, or I'm not good at math, not good at singing. So I'm unlikely to try anything that's suggested to me by a teacher, a coach, a leader. And if I do try, I probably don't implement it fully. And then I don't do well. So now
Right.
I lack confidence, which then impacts my beliefs and my willingness to adapt strategies that we know make people more successful. On the flip side, if I come in with a mindset that says, I can learn, it's difficult, I don't know it yet, but I'm willing to try. Now I'm open to trying some of these success behaviors that I'm being taught. And as I implement them, I start to see results, and that changes my self-belief and the story I tell myself. And now I have greater confidence, and now I go take on a bigger challenge.
Hmm.
So they all work in interacting with each other. And why a blueprint? I think it goes back to that idea of a manual or how do we build something that's strong and structural? And we know in engineering that the triangle is that strongest structure.
Yes.
And so that's where I've called it the performance blueprint, of laying out a map of how do you build performance that is going to help you thrive in those moments. And you'd ask about optimization. And I do like to use the word optimal rather than peak. You climb a mountain to reach the peak, and then you go back down. You don't spend very much time at the summit. Most
Right.
of the time it is reaching the peak. And we love those experiences. They feel great, they're fun, but I think we spend most of our time either on the way up or down the mountain or in the valley.
Right.
And so can we optimize? Can we do what's best? And I'm really interested in what's best. What does research suggest? What does experience show is going to give us the best results? And so if we can optimize our preparation, optimize our mindset, that gives us the best opportunity to get the results that we're seeking.
I love that. And I love that you use the mountain analogy, because very often we can also become addicted to that climb up and overcoming the hardship, right? And then we get up there and we're like, woo, we did it. And, the dopamine goes away, and now we need to do something else again, right? We need to get right back on that train. And so it's really about, like, hey, celebrate what you've done, and, stay there a while. There's no rush to go back down. Actually, there's no rush to go anywhere, right? So I really appreciate that analogy. And then, Michael Solomon just commented, ever notice how we hire skill and train knowledge, but we don't train mindset? And I think that's a key point. I mean, I had one boss who, because of what he went through, we worked on mindset, but he didn't necessarily call it that, but we definitely talked more in that realm. But everybody else, it's like, yeah, here's, in business aviation too, it's like, here's your cell phone and here's the operating manual, go forth and prosper, like, figure it out. And if you don't, then sorry, but just watch what I do and you'll figure it out. So what's your experience? I know you do a lot of training with teams. Do you see that this mindset component is really lacking?
Well, for sure. I think our mind can be our own worst enemy.
Hmm.
It can be our biggest fan, but a lot of times we self-sabotage. And we have a built-in negativity bias as humans.
Of course. Yeah.
I have this exercise I'll do with a group of students, a group of high performers, and I'll put a slide up, and it has 400 vertical lines, and it has one that's tilted off axis. And I ask them what they notice, and they all point at the one that's
Yeah.
off axis. And I said, wait a minute, you don't recognize that 99.75% of these lines are perfectly aligned straight.
Yeah.
No, they notice the one thing. And so we just inherently look at those things. And so we need to look at that. I think we do have to train mindset, and going back to cultural and technical changes, I think a lot of people don't have the same experiences that our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents had, where they inherently developed resilience and persistence. Even if I use myself, I grew up mowing the lawn, shoveling snow, raking leaves, doing all of those chores. And if the lawnmower didn't work, then I had to figure out what was wrong with it and get it fixed. And that was on me. If it jammed, I had to take care of it. If the snow had frozen, and I still had to get it out, like I just had to stick with it and get through it.
Yeah.
In Vegas, we don't have snow and we don't have grass. And so, people don't even have those types of tasks. And then,
Right.
technologically, everything is predicated on speed and convenience. And so if something is slow and inconvenient or hard, it must be bad.
Right.
And that's how you get better at anything, is slow and difficult and inconvenient. So the tolerance for effort and work has just been worked out of us by the technology that surrounds us. And so I think we do have to train that mindset more and teach people how to be resilient. You mentioned the workplace too. And what if we told our employees not just what to do, but how about what we want them to accomplish, and then equip them with the skills to be resilient when challenge arise, when the sales pitch doesn't go the way you wanted it, or market conditions change, and something that's totally out of your control is having a significant impact. I think we need to equip our employees with those skills more than the technical skills.
Yes, you can teach technical skills. You could hire anyone right now and put them through flight school or put them through mechanic training or coding, any of the above. And with time, they will now know how to do that skill, right? And they'll get better and better at it. But it's the attitude and the willingness to keep going, to exert effort, as you said, right? There's a lot of people who don't want to put in effort now. And some of that is the byproduct of technology. It's also the byproduct of previous generations had a very different environment in growing. We had a different level of consciousness and awareness of things, right? And of course, as a parent, you want to make things better for your children. And so you then have, your life is different. And so then the conditions are different. And so how do we, instill those same values and give the opportunities that those can be developed, which is why I really love Stoicism, right? And going through those exercises of, well, what if you did lose everything? All the things you have today, what if it was just gone? Like, could you rebuild yourself? Answer is yes, we all could, right? But
Right.
really sitting down and, wow, what would I do if that happened? And what skills do I have? And what can I draw upon? And I do cold showers or cold plunges whenever I can, because that's facing something that's difficult. It's second tier fun, right? People are like, you think that's fun? I'm like, it's second tier fun. But I also know that I'm more capable, that when those harsher conditions arise, I will be able to withstand them, right? So I think that's also important for teams, most certainly, but we should start at younger ages, start with our children at home as parents, and in our schools, in kindergarten and primary school, start talking about mindset and having those kind of conversations.
Yeah, the awareness piece is huge, of recognizing what's going on,
Right.
because as humans, we dislike discomfort.
Right.
And so I've heard a lot of people in the last few years use the expression, "I'm so stressed. I'm stressed." And sometimes I wonder, are you really stressed, or is it just uncomfortable?
Mhm. Yeah.
Applying for this job, speaking to this group, networking when I'm an introvert, is that stressful? Okay, so, if I define stress as when demands exceed resources, so there could be an element of that there, but I think it's just more uncomfortable. But we don't have this comfort with being uncomfortable, and so we seek ease, we seek comfort, and so doing that cold plunge, going on that long hike, putting ourselves in challenging situations that are maybe uncomfortable help us build that capacity to deal with it when it arises. And so just helping people be aware of that situation, I think is massively important.
Yeah.
I think one thing that helped me in looking at sports psychology, because in college I had this deep suspicion of psychology, because I had this Freudian image of lay on the couch and tell me about your feelings and your
Right.
mother, and
Right.
it is how technology has progressed, and now we know what goes on in the brain. That we can look at an fMRI and see how the brain is functioning. We can see what happens when you're visualizing. Uh, you know, for our pilots, if you're chair flying, now we know what happens in the brain when you're doing that.
Right.
And so that's huge, because now it's not really psychology, that's just biology. That's how our brain was designed to work. If we understand what happens when I'm stressed and how I change my breathing patterns, and if I know how my breath can change my body, how I can use my brain to change my breath, which in turn changes my brain,
Yeah.
now we have tools to deal with the discomfort that we didn't have in the past. And that's been a benefit of technology and development. So uh, being aware, oh, my heart's beating faster, I'm breathing faster, I'm sweating. Oh, that's a response of sympathetic nervous system in a moment of challenge. I know
Yes.
how to deal with that. I recognize what's happening, and now I can adjust. And that's, I mean, that's a lot of flying, right? It's constantly adjusting to changing
Exactly.
the conditions, changing of the wind, and so you
Particularly
notice.
with your hand flying, right? You notice
Yep.
the sensations and you can feel the changes and the shifts, and so you respond accordingly, right? Um, I love that you brought that up about the data because, just like we said in the very beginning, the language around understanding what we're going through or understanding our values, it helps inform us to make better choices. And so many times we just are, I would say the average person, at least in North America, their emotional vocabulary is quite limited. And
I
so they
feel
might,
good, I feel bad.
right. Or I feel sad or I feel mad. And that's kind of the extent of what you get. Maybe sometimes we know, oh, I was embarrassed or I was pissed or I was, we can use one of these outer edge words. If anyone ever wants to dive into this, look up the emotions wheel, right? And it
Yep.
can help teach you a lot. But there's also this really cool app that I've downloaded now called How We Feel. And it's by a research group and professor. I forget if he's Yale or Stanford, one of those. And it'll prompt you to 4 times a day or however many times you said it. There's different colors and shapes for all of the emotions, and it'll tell you what it means also. So instead of assuming, you're learning. And there's these little videos that pop up. So if you select a low energy item that is, maybe I'm exhausted, it'll say, hey, here's some strategies to deal with that. And I have found it so valuable because also now I can go back and see, hey, actually, on the aggregate, this last week, this last month, I've been in a really good state. As you said, the negative bias, sometimes we kind of harp on the one thing that went wrong or that one interaction that wasn't great. But now you can look and say, actually, I've been doing really good, right? And so it can help change your perspective. And then I wear one of these things, the Whoop, and then that gives you a lot of data on your heart rate, your oxygen, blood levels, your temperature, and it's been really interesting this last week as I'm rehearsing for next week. It'll be like, you were in the high stress zone for 49 minutes today. It's like, oh, well, what time was that at? Oh, I was rehearsing. Okay. But I didn't feel stressed. And so sometimes we don't necessarily feel the thing that's happening, but then bringing awareness to it, now you can go, oh, I can take a breath. I can go sit down and do nothing for 3 minutes and, just have my cup of coffee. And those small things are what can get us back on track.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that app, because that's something I share with every group I talk to about awareness and recognizing, because it's so specific.
Yes.
You know, I feel like we've gotten a bit generic in our language,
Yeah.
and it really breaks that down. And you mentioned like an emotion wheel too, of disaggregating those emotions into more and more particular expressions. I just think it's so much better for the conversation if we can
Absolutely.
identify what we're feeling.
And sometimes we have the wrong perception around what we're feeling, right? Just because we're feeling bad. And so we automatically equate that as negative, but maybe it's not bad. Maybe it's just a signal that this situation is not aligned, that this is not safe. This is not something you want to repeat, right? And so it's information to help you make different choices. It's not just automatically like we categorize anger as bad or sadness as bad. Don't ever have it, that everything is awesome, right? And so when we ignore those things and we suppress it, then that's often where we come into some strife as well, because we're not having this healthy expression. And for a long time, I didn't realize that, being withdrawn or having numbness, that's actually under anger, not sadness. And there's a lot of people who might not necessarily realize that, right? And so once we can get the language around it and the understanding, we can then seek out resources that can help us with the processing and shifting out into something else.
Yeah, and you used a great word of it's information.
Yes.
It takes the emotion out of it. It's just data.
Mhm.
And so now if we have the information before us, now we can look at it objectively. And that's what the Stoics did,
Mhm.
is let's be aware, is this perception or is this reality? Is this subjective or is this objective? And so one of the examples I like to use with people is their attitude indicator. So what's our attitude,
Right.
and how are we expressing that? And then are we having a bad day, or did we have a bad 5 minutes that we've been milking all day long?
Right.
So what's the information? What are the facts?
Yeah.
And that's where I like to get to, because then we can make sounder decisions in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. The attitude indicator. One of my favorite quotes that I used last week is your attitude, not your aptitude, determines your altitude. By Zig Ziglar. And, it's so true. Sometimes, I mean, I've been there myself, right? Like some tiny little inconvenience happens and I let myself get frustrated and just be annoyed all day long. And I'm much better at it now of being like, Sarah, get over it, get over yourself. Like, do you want to be annoyed all day long or do you want to actually have fun with your day or like be productive? Right. And as soon as I can catch myself in that moment, then I'm able to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to breathe. I'm going to go for a run or do something, get rid of that energy. And then I can move on to something else. But certainly in the past, I was very, very good at stewing in it.
And what you just described there is a skill. Like how we talk to ourselves is a skill. We do it all day long. We talk to ourselves more than anybody else.
Yeah.
But being able to recognize when it's productive and when it's not, if we're coaching ourselves or just criticizing ourselves, again, there's that awareness piece again. How can we turn that into language that's going to help us and advance us? That's a
Yeah.
skill we need to teach people.
Yes.
Like you said, take a breath. That's a skill that can be taught. So we can teach these skills to our students, to our employees. Then there's probably going to be less and fewer headaches coming across our desks, because they're going to handle
And
it on their own.
breathing helps with literal headaches too, as does drinking water. One of the hacks I realized is if I have a straw like this in my water bottle, I can just sit here and like drink and I can still type and do my thing. And it sounds ridiculous that just like unscrewing a water bottle was the barrier to me drinking more water. Because if I had an open thing here, I'd totally knock it over. I've done it many times. But it was, and now I drink way more water just because of that small little change, right? The one degree shift. And so, a lot of people laugh at this whole topic of breathing. Like, I know how to breathe. I breathe all day long. But
Yeah.
actually, most of us do not breathe properly or
No.
enough, especially when we're on devices. Like I read this article, it's already several years ago. I'm sure there's so much on it now, dubbing email apnea. So we have this tendency to, when we respond to messages, to hold our breath or to breathe very, very shallowly. And I started to pay attention to that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am. I'm just like shoulders up here, breathing like tense, and then like almost out of breath at the end of it, or my heart rate is spiking because you're focusing, you're trying to think about what you want to say and all those other things. And just bringing my awareness to that changed so much.
And at the same time, a lot of people that go through the day, like you mentioned, breathing shallowly, they also breathe too much.
You can
Slow
hyperventilate.
breathing is a lot of people are probably, most Americans are probably breathing 12 times a minute. And really, we want to be more about 5.5, 6 times per minute.
Yeah.
And, so if you're in a conversation, that's going to change that pace. But if we can just slow it down and deepen it, it has so many health benefits, but also so many mental benefits that, again, simple skill that if we taught people that earlier, then they're equipped for it ahead of time. So that's one reason I think it's important to be teaching this in schools and to youth athletes, and not just waiting till traditionally it's been professional athletes that have a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach. But the vast majority of youth athletes and students aren't going to get to that level.
Right.
Likewise, the vast number of our employees are not going to be CEOs.
Right.
So how are we equipping the masses? Help them be
Yeah.
better.
I love that you brought that up too, because back to the point about learning how to learn, not just what to learn, but how to learn, having tools and resources that will help students to stay calm during exams. We all learn differently. We've now, obviously we now know more about this, again, the teaching styles, right? But also in the receiving, understanding how you learn best. So you know what to ask for, or if it's delivered in a way that's not in the best format for you, you have awareness to go seek out the other style or resource, or go and have a conversation so that you can start to connect those dots. And so really having those types of conversations, and I remember when I was doing my MBA and I had an accounting exam, I'm like, just, that's not my thing. Numbers, no, thank you. Excel, like I want to run and hide, go somewhere else, anywhere but there. And the professor he just looked at me and he said, Sarah, studies show that the more relaxed you are, the better you're going to do on the exam, even if you do nothing else. I was like, okay, all right. So that whole study time and everything leading up, I was like, I'm just going to, whatever I can do to be calm when I'm dealing with this information. And I didn't do like amazing, but I didn't fail, and I got more than a pass. So it really worked, and that was so important, but I had never ever heard that before from a teacher.
Yeah. There's so many myths about learning too. I led a session for teachers back in the fall, and I put up all the professional development topics, that the trends that have come down the pike the last 25 years. And, it's well over 100 different things. And then we played a game. How many of you have sat through this professional development session? And so, we had some people, and myself included, that had been through a significant number of them. And a lot of them don't really have any basis in research. Somebody thought it was a great idea, and somebody came up with it, and but there's no background and so that's one of the fascinating things to me, is that once I started getting into learning literature and starting to identify some things of what actually makes for good learning, I'm like, wow, we need to change how we teach, how we train, how we equip people. Um, I I think you mentioned learning style, so I'm going to jump on my soapbox here for a second,
Yeah, please.
because I think that's maybe the most common myth out there, is that everyone
Okay.
has their own learning style, and if there's if it's not my learning style, then I can't learn. Okay, so one, we're telling ourselves a story that, well,
Yeah.
that instructor, that boss, that trainer isn't using my learning style, so I'm not going to learn anything today. And so we shut off the opportunity to learn right off the bat. So
Great
that's not
point.
a great place to be, but
Mm-mm.
there's actually zero research that supports the idea of people are kinesthetic learners or
Okay.
auditory learners or visual learners. You may have a preference for some things, but there's no evidence that shows one is better for learning for different populations. But it's this idea that just has been perpetuated, and
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah,
tell
I'm
you the
sold
number
out
of
for
trainings I've been to that speak to that. Uh, and so we want to make sure we give people tools that are based in research, but then also help them with their story, because I think that idea has probably been a disservice to more people, because they've created in their mind, oh, I can't learn because of something that
right.
doesn't exist. And but that ability to recognize, as you did, okay, this is not my best subject, but you went to the professor. You had a conversation instead of just struggling on your own, and he gave you great insight. Uh, the other thing he probably could have said to you is, get your sleep.
Yes. Oh
You
my gosh,
know,
sleep.
pilots don't have to sleep. Uh,
Yes. Minimum
Students
rest.
need to sleep. Every sleep is a performance enhancing drug, and just going to bed is going to make your performance better. You know, there was a study at Baylor a couple of years ago, and they paid students to get more sleep. Like, where do I sign up for that study? Uh, because they said, we want you to sleep more, and that resulted in an 11% increase in their final exam grades. Just sleeping more, just getting 8 hours of sleep per night. and
Wow.
and so we know high performers have to perform on command, and sleep's another way to do that. So there are all these little tools that aren't really that little, that I think if we can get that information in the hands of people, then we don't need these massive policy changes or
Yeah.
restructuring. It's just, let's be more effective.
Yes. I love that you brought up sleep, because it's incredible what a great night's sleep can do. I have a whole new relationship and appreciation for sleep. Like, I could never take a nap because I thought I was wasting time. I really wanted to maximize my performance in the gym. So I sacrificed sleep. So I wasn't optimized by any means. Right. And so the mindset around it was all incorrect. And I had this wrong story that sleep was for when I was dead, or I would be lazy if I slept too much. And so my body was just always kind of in this alert state. And when I came back from Hong Kong and was staying with my family for like 2, 3 weeks, I slept about 12 to 14 hours a night. I was like, whoa, what's happening? It's so strange, but I felt amazing also. But my system was like, no, 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 this is a good thing. We need this. Um, and the latest sleep research shows that if you are sleeping 6 hours a night, 10 days in a row, it's equivalent to being up for 24 hours in terms of your cognitive functioning. So,
Yeah. And
um,
you're functionally DUI.
right.
Your
So,
reaction time, your processing speed is the same as if you're blowing a point oh eight.
a D, yeah, which is insane, because I mean, not even just aviation, like dispatchers and people that are on the road all the time, but so many industries, so many people only sleep about 6 hours a night or maybe less. And so, yeah, talk about wanting to enhance your performance, get sleep. That's so powerful. Little
Yeah,
kids, like they hate naps. I'm like, no, no, I love naps now. I want to take naps whenever I can.
for sure.
Amazing. All right, Mark, I this has been so fascinating and we've touched on so many great points. And I really want to ask you, what do you think is your superpower?
So I think I'm really good at looking at things logically and just maintaining a calm approach in any kind of decision of let's look at the facts, let's look at what's going on, and let's be patient as we unveil the necessary information, and let's do the digging if we need to find that information so that we can make a really sound decision. So uh, I don't get too excited, I don't get too upset. I just stay pretty even keel, and then let's look at the facts and make a rational decision.
I love it. Yeah, it's we can get caught up in the emotions sometimes. I like to remind people that it's just energy in motion. So let it be in motion and then let yourself look at the information. And so that's really powerful, especially with the work that you do, because by you being calm and rational and able to take what are the facts here, right? And then
Right.
you can help walk people through. So that's very powerful.
Yeah. Calm is contagious too. And
Absolutely.
that's something I tell coaches all the time of how you respond is subconsciously experienced by your team.
Hmm.
How the boss reacts is interpreted by the employees. So
Right.
let's be calm and spread that.
If you're running around like a headless chicken, then you will have chaos, right?
Sure.
And energy is contagious, and for the people who are so new to feelings and things, I mean, we have this language, right? You could cut the tension in the room with a knife. Like we know when there's tension or when it's calm or it's chaotic. I still remember the first leader that I worked with that was always super calm, and it made me a lot more calm, and I was at that time on the hamster wheel, not sleeping, really intense CrossFit all the time, it was really calming just to be around him and then to, have him think and be slow, and it taught me a lot, right? And then I would notice how I would feel around other leaders that were like me, but maybe times 10, right? And I would just get more and more amped up. So it's very powerful to do that. So Mark, who would you say is on your board of directors? Do you have a regular group of people that you check in with and reflect with? Are they people in your inner circle? Or are there some that are maybe outside that you use to influence and help give you judgment on the decisions you make?
Yeah, I think of it in somewhat two ways. I know certainly growing up, I looked more at mentors from a distance of
Mm,
people from history, like John Wooden would be a great example. I
yeah.
probably own more John Wooden books than any other author on my bookshelf. And so I definitely draw from that. But as far as, when it comes to a decision, when it comes to a challenging situation, perhaps, I'm going to talk to my wife.
Yeah.
That's a given. Uh, my brother would be somebody that I'd go to. Uh, there's a coach. He was the athletic director. Uh, we coached together for 24 years. Named Brett Walter that I would call for sure if anytime I have a challenge or ideas. And then Sarah Castillo was the head of my graduate program, and I will always go to her first for anything in the sports psych world. She's going to ask me the questions that I need to be looking at, and she has this beautiful ability to ask the question I needed to hear and get
Mm,
me thinking about um, angles that I haven't considered yet. So anything professionally on that side, then I'm always going to Sarah first.
I like that you said the question that you needed to hear, not the statement or the, motivational, but the question that you needed to hear.
Yeah, questions are big for me. I like to think I ask good questions, but um, I enjoy it when somebody else asks me the questions too, and doesn't just take everything I'm saying as the gospel truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to ask those questions, even of ourselves, right? And constantly check in and, why is this my value? Why is this my belief? And make sure that you're anchored to it. Because if you've grown and, evolved, maybe got new information, you've changed your mind about something, and yet you're still kind of anchored to something else, that's where those conflicts can come in. So it's, that the gentle inquiry into our own internal experience is also very important. All right, my final question, which is a big one, is how do you best serve or represent humanity?
I think as a coach, I think that's the best way I can do it. Billy Graham said, "A coach will influence more people in a single season than most do in a lifetime."
Mm,
And I still think about everything I do as a coach. Do I teach? Do I consult? Yes, but I come back to, I'm coaching, and the word coach uh, is derived from a Hungarian word that means carriage. And so we think about the
mm,
purpose of a carriage, it's to transport its passengers to their desired destination. And
yeah,
and as a coach, that's my goal, is to help you get to where you want to go. And so I think uh, that's how you impact and change others, is through coaching them. And you're equipping them to fly the plane, dribble the basketball, hit that golf ball, give that speech, but then so they can go do it on their own,
yes.
and not just do it, but then thrive in those moments that really matter. And so I think that's how I best represent humanity.
I love it. And I love the etymology of the word coach there. I'm a big word nerd, so that's awesome. Thank you so much. Mark, if people would like to connect with you and learn more and get in touch, what are the best ways they can do that?
So all my social media is at Coach Mark Cheney, and my website is www.coachmarkcheney.com, and that's got my phone number on there. That's got my email on there. You can reach out directly to me, and I would be
Amazing.
happy to have that conversation with you, and talk about coaching and performance and how to get you where you want to go.
Beautiful. Amazing. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Sarah.
For everyone else watching, we'll be back next week in the lounge with another guest. Stay tuned and we'll see you soon.